Today we'll be looking at simplifying radicals. We'll start with this warm-up. Simplify x times x times x times y to the fourth. If you notice, we have three x's being multiplied together. Another way to say that is x to the third. And then we have 1y times another 4y's. So total we're multiplying together 5y, so we call that y to the fifth. Today we're going to look at simplifying radicals by pulling out perfect squares and simplifying radicals with radicands, or simplifying radicals with variables. Note, square roots are a type of radical. When you see that square root sign, that is actually called a radical. So the different parts of a radical, we call this number, if there's a number here, put it in here, this is called your index. Usually for a square root, the index is not written because it's so common. So usually you don't see a number there, and that means a square root. We have this thing right here under the radical is called a radicand. And then the square root sign itself, so this thing right here, is called the radical. All right, so we're going to start with square numbers. If we look at taking the area of each of these squares, the area of a 1 by 1 square is 1. The area of a 2 by 2 square is 4. You can see there's 4 units in there. The area of a 3 by 3 square is 9. A 4 by 4 is 16, and a 5 by 5 is 25. All right, so all of these numbers are called square numbers. Explain why they're called square numbers. Because if you get them by they are the areas of squares, I should say. So they're called square numbers because they are the area of squares. List all the square numbers from 1 to 144 below. All right, so we have 1 times 1 is 1, so 1 is a square number. 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 16, 25, 36. We have 7 times 7, 49. 8 times 8, 64. 9 times 9, 81. 10 times 10, 100. 11 times 11, and 12 times 12. All right, so these are all square numbers, and they are the area of squares. So we can use it to find, to simplify square roots. When I ask you to find the square root of 1, it's what number times itself is 1, and that is 1. Here the square root of 4 means what number times itself is 4, and that's 2. This one right here, if we do the square root of 9 squared, order of operations, let's do 9 squared first. That's 81. And then if we take the square root of 81, we get 9. And so what happens is, if you want to go from the first step to the last step, we know that the square root and the radicand, they cancel each other. So if you have any number squared under the square root sign, so like 7 squared, and you take the square root, that answer will be 7 because the squared and the square root will cancel each other. Likewise, if we have the square root of x squared, that will cancel and we'll just get that number underneath. So again, I kind of showed you 9 squared is 81, the square root of that is 9, so you can skip that step by canceling the squared and the square root. Investigation, how can you simplify a non-perfect square number under a radical? Solve for the missing side. Can you give an exact answer, one without a decimal? And you'll see exact answers a lot, ACTs and different standardized tests. So let's take a look at this. If you remember, this is an isosceles triangle. This means both sides are the same. Let's solve for C. We can use Pythagorean theorem. 3 squared plus 3 squared equals C squared. And 3 squared is 9. All right. So we have 18 equals C squared, square root. And before, we can type that number in our calculator, the square root of 18, and get a decimal. But the question is, how do we rewrite that so it's an exact answer? No decimals. And so that's what we're going to investigate next, and then we can come back to this problem and finish. So here, what if a number isn't a perfect square number? How do you get an exact answer? So let's do the square root of 50. Think of your list of square numbers. What is the biggest number you can divide 50 by? And if you don't know, just go down the list. Can we divide 50 by 49 and get a whole number? No. How about 36? No. How about 25? Yeah, 25 we can. We can say the square root of 50 is the square root of 25 times 2. So you find the biggest square number you can divide 50 by, and then you split it apart. 25 times 2 is 50. And then we're going to rewrite it so that the square we separate them. The square root of 25 times the square root of 2. So we're just separating those two out, because then we can simplify the square root of 25 and get 5 square root of 2. This is called an exact answer. Now on a standardized test, if you see that and you have a decimal answer, you can just type in 5 square root of 2, hit enter, and then see which decimal matches up with your answer. All right, so let's take a look at this one, the square root of 40. Again, what's the biggest square number here we can divide 40 by? Well, 49 is too big. 36 doesn't work. 25 gives us a decimal, so it is 16, so it is 9. So here 4 is the biggest square number you can divide 40 by. So we're going to say, all right, this is 4 times 10. We're going to split it apart, the square root of 4 times the square root of 10. And now we can rewrite the square root of 4 as 2. So our final answer is 2 square root of 10. Let's do the next one. We have the square root of 48. Again, find the biggest square number you can divide 48 by. All right, so just go down the list. Again, 49 is too big. 36 gives us a decimal, so does 25. But 16 works. We can write this as the square root of 48 times, or sorry, not the square root of 48. The square root of 16 times 3. Split it apart. The square root of 16, square root of 3. And when you solve for that then, or simplify, I should say, we get the square root of 16, which is 4. 4 times the square root of 3. All right, simplifying. Okay, so we did all the steps. I kind of combined them in one. Okay, let's go back to that one, square root of 18. What's the biggest square number you can divide 18 by? And that would be 9. 9 times 2. Split it apart. This is 3. Okay, I skipped a step. Square root of 9, square root of 2, which is 3 square root of 2. So these two are equivalent, but the exact answer, 3 square root of 2, is the one you would see on a standardized test. Okay. So let's do another one, and then we'll extend. So here, can you give an exact answer? Again, it's a right triangle. We can use Pythagorean theorem. The legs squared equals c squared. We get 16 plus 64 equals c squared. We'll add those together. We get the square root of 80. I'm kind of out of room here, so let me write it up here. So this is the square root of 80 equals c. What's the biggest square number that you can divide 80 by? So just go down the list of square numbers until you find one that is not a decimal. And I believe 16 is the biggest. Yep. So we can rewrite that as the square root of 16 times the square root of 5, because 16 times 5 is 80. And then we'll rewrite the square root of 16 as 4. So 4 square root of 5 is the simplified answer. Okay, what if there's a number in front? We're going to do the same thing. Let's ignore the 5 at first and just do this part. The square root of 18 you can rewrite as the square root of 9 times the square root of 2, and simplify that the square root of 9 is 3. So 3 square root of 2. But now stick that 5 out in front, and you multiply. So 5 times 3 is 15, and our final answer is 15 square root of 2. Okay, so when there's that number outside, you multiply your answer, your whole numbers at the end. So let's do the next one. What's the biggest number you can divide 56 by? The biggest square number, I should say. So let's go down the list. Let's see if I can find it. 56. 4. I think it's 4. So this will be the square root of 4 times the square root of 14. Okay, and then the square root of 4 is 2. So we have 2 square root of 14. And now we have that 10 out in front. So our final answer is 20 square root of 14. So again, pull out the biggest square number and multiply by the number in front. Let's do another one. What's the biggest square number you can divide 32 by? And it's 16. So 16 times 2 is 32. Let's simplify that. The square root of 16 is 4. So this is 4 square root of 2. Don't forget about that 2 in front. And we'll multiply those together, and we'll get 8 square root of 2. All right, and then our last one here, we have the square root of 12, and I can rewrite that as the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. That's 2 square root of 3 times 6.
Any junior who did not prepare
12 square root of 3.
For the ACT during advisory yesterday must get a pass from a teacher to go to the learning lab and do the pre-administration.
Last thing, simplifying with a denominator.
If you have
again, ignore the bottom at first.
Prior to ACT, you will not be allowed to test. Thank you.
All right, biggest number you can divide 18 by is 9. So this is square root of 9, square root of 2, because 9 times 2 is 18. This is 3 square root of 2. But now stick that number back down at the bottom and simplify 3 divided by 3. Well, that's a 1. So our answer is square root of 2. Let's do the next one, 56. So the square root of 56, the biggest number, I think you can divide that by as 4. We did that above here. So it's 4 and 14. So this is 2 square root of 14 divided by 4. We can reduce 2 fourths. That's the same as 1/2. So divide each by 2, and we get the square root of 14 over 2. That's our answer. And we have the square root of 48. Again, we did the square root of 48. No, we didn't. All right, and that would be 16. Oops. All right, so the square root of 48 is the square root of 16 times 3. Simplify the square root of 16, so that's 4 square root of 3. Stick that number on the bottom, the denominator, so divide by 8 and reduce. Again, you can divide 4 and 8 by 4 and get 1/2. And so we get the square root of 3 over 2, because 8 divided by 4 is 2, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. Okay, and our last one, the square root of 75. Biggest square number you can divide that by is 25. 25 times 3. We get 5 square root of 3 over 12. And then I think that's it. You can't simplify any further. Okay, so we've practiced simplifying radicals with numbers outside, numbers on the bottom, no numbers on the outside. So your practice, the first part, all the answers are on the bottom. You just got to match them up, and then you have some more to try.